This is a lecture on the book of Job, part 2, Job chapters 12 through 31, which cover the second and third cycles of dialogue between Job and his friends. And my name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle. Now, the book of Job is dealing with the question of why do people suffer. And the prologue indicates that suffering can be as a trial of faith or a test of one's faith. That's what chapters 1 and 2 indicate is the case for Job. His friends are saying that people suffer because of their sins. Now, in the second cycle, starting with Job chapter 12 through 14, Job is answering his accusers back again. He thinks his accusers are full of hot air. Wisdom will die with you, he says. And he doesn't mean that literally. He is dripping in irony. It means you're not so smart as you think you are. But Job also wants to argue with God. He acknowledges that God alone has wisdom. Chapter 12, verse 13, to God belongs wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are his. But Job wants to argue with God over the justice of what has happened to him. Chapter 13 and verse 3. But I desire to speak to the Almighty and to argue my case with God. And even though God may strike him dead for it, he hopes he can win that argument with God. 13:15, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. Now, in chapter 14, you get some reflections on death and afterlife. Job thinks humans are too insignificant to deserve such divine surveillance as he's received. Chapter 14, verse 3, do you fix your eye on such a one? Will you bring him before you for judgment? And then verse 6, so look away from him and let him alone till he has put in his time like a hired man. And then he also uses the analogy of a tree. And you can see in the background a cut down tree. If you cut down a tree, it has a chance of coming back. But if you cut down a human being, they arise no more. 14:7, at least there is hope for a tree. It is cut down, it will sprout again, and its new shoots will not fell. Its roots may grow old in the ground, and its stump die in the soil, and yet at the scent of water it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. But man dies and is laid low. He breathes his last and is no more. As water disappears from the sea, or a riverbed becomes parched and dry, so man lies down and does not rise. Till the heavens are no more, men will not awake or be aroused from their sleep. Now this raises the question, does Job ever clearly affirm that there is an afterlife? Well, in chapter 14 and verse 14, you can translate it in such a way as to indicate that there is. If a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my hard service, I will wait for my renewal to come. You will call, and I will answer you. You will long for the creature your hands have made. That's from the NIV. And it seems to indicate that you will call and I will answer, even if I die. I will live again, resurrection. On the other hand, the New Revised Standard Version is translated in such a way as to indicate no. If mortals die, will they live again? All the days of my service, I would wait until my release should come. You would call, and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands. Now, understood this way, it's more of a pipe dream that this is what I would like. I would like to wait until my release should come. I would like for you to call and for me to answer and for you to long for the work of your hands, but not necessarily going to happen. Now, which fits the context best, the NIV or the New Revised Standard Version? Both are, by the way, perfectly acceptable translations of the Hebrew. Well, verse 19 suggests that verse 14 is only a pipe dream. As water wears away stones and torrents wash away the soil, so you destroy man's hope. We might hope that God would call us from the grave, but you destroy man's hope. Other evidence supports lack of affirmation of an afterlife, particularly the tree analogy that we just went over. It suggests that Job doesn't affirm any kind of afterlife. And there are places where afterlife could be mentioned, but are not. And so the New Revised Standard Version is probably right, though as it turns out, many times in this book, Job and his friends are wrong. You can't read the book of Job and simply quote what either Job or his friends say and say, well, that's the Word of God, Scripture, because Job and his friends are quite wrong and disagree with each other at a number of points. And so Job may not have believed in an afterlife, but Job is wrong. Now, the second cycle then continues. Eliphaz responds in Job 15 and accuses Job of arrogance towards God and man, and by man he means himself. And he also continues to accuse him of sinning. Your sin prompts your mouth. You adopt the tongue of the crafty, 15 and verse 5. Verse 7, are you the first man ever born? Were you brought forth before the hills? Do you listen in on God's counsel? Do you limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? What insights do you have that we do not have? The gray-haired and the aged are on our side, men even older than your father. So Job is speaking out of his sinful nature, and he's offended that Job is not listening to his side of wisdom. Now Job accuses Eliphaz of being a sorry comforter. 16:2, I've heard many things like these, miserable comforters you all are. Then he goes on to say that he feels like God is using him for target practice. Verse 13, his archers surround me. Without pity, he pierces my kidneys and spills my gall on the ground. He laments his situation and longs for death. 17:13, the only home I hope for is the grave. Bildad then responds. Bildad's insulted by Job's considering them to be kind of stupid beasts. Why are we regarded as cattle and considered stupid in your sight? 18 verse 3. But then Bildad goes on to rant for the rest of the chapter on how wicked people, like Job, suffer. The lamp of the wicked is snuffed out. The flame of his fire stops burning. Chapter 18, verse 5. Job responds by complaining about his comforters again. How long will you torment me and crush me with words? 10 times now you have reproached me. Shamelessly you attack me. That's 19 verses 2 and 3. Job believes that God has wronged him and persecutes him by punishing him for sins that he did not commit. Job says in 19:6, then know that God has wronged me. 19 and verse 22, why do you persecute me as God does? Bildad denied that God perverts justice back in 8 and verse 3. But Job in chapter 19 affirms that God has perverted justice. Now, who's right? And my answer is neither one of them. Bildad is wrong to say that Job suffers because of his sins. Job is wrong to say that God has wronged him. Later, Elihu will rightly call Job to task for this claim in chapter 33:10 and also verse 13. Now, another passage that could imply that Job affirmed an afterlife is in Job 19:23 through 29. Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll. And by the way, Job got his wish there. It's in the Bible. That they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my flesh has been destroyed, yet in, or literally from, my flesh, I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, and I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. If you say, how will we hound him, since the root of the troubles lies in him? You should fear the sword yourselves, for wrath will bring punishment by the sword, and then you will know that there is a judgment. Now, there are three views of this verse, especially the line about from my flesh I will see God in verse 26. One view is that this expresses a hope of resurrection. After my flesh has been destroyed, his Redeemer, who would be God, or from a Christian perspective, Christ, will give him a new body, so that in the resurrection he will see God. Now, the problem with this view is it makes Job contradict himself. Back in chapter 14, he affirmed that a man lies down and does not lie until heaven is no more. He will not awake or be aroused out of his sleep. He denies that there is any kind of a resurrection after death. And so that is difficult for this hope of resurrection interpretation. A second view, though, is that perhaps he's talking about not resurrection of the body, but existence after death in a bodiless spirit. And this takes 19 and verse 26 to mean, yet apart from my flesh, I shall see God. That's the partitive meaning of the preposition from, which is min in Hebrew. Despite the rod of death, his disembodied spirit will see God. But the problem with this view is that nowhere in Job does Job affirm the doctrine of an afterlife, even where it would fit his argument. Now, the third view is that this is actually a statement of vindication in this life. And you could translate the verse as follows to get that meaning. Even after my skin has been thus destroyed, meaning presently his boil-covered body, currently in this life, even after this has happened, yet from my flesh, meaning while I'm yet in the flesh, while I'm alive, I wish to see God, taking the modal use of the imperfect as a wish rather than a prediction of the future. Even after this flesh has been thus destroyed, yet from my flesh I wish to see God. He wishes that from his weak and emaciated flesh, covered with boils, that he see God and ask God to acquit him. Now, this vindication in life view is, I think, the one that best fits the context. Nowhere does Job affirm any belief in the afterlife. Often Job expresses hope of vindication in this life, in which case his friends need to watch out, as it says in verse 29, you should fear the sword yourself, for wrath will bring punishment by the sword, and you will know that there is a judgment. And vindication in this life is in fact what happens at the end of the book. Job does see God, and he is vindicated, while his friends are rebuked. The second cycle continues with Zophar responding in chapter 20. Zophar is insulted by Job's intimation that he, meaning Zophar, will be judged. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. But then he continues to warn Job that unless Job repents, he will suffer the fate of the wicked. The mirth of the wicked is brief. The joy of the godless lasts but a moment. The third cycle is largely redundant with the first and second cycles, so I'm not going to cover that in any depth. With his friends still accusing Job, while Job continuing to deny their charges and to accuse God of picking on him. But there is a poem on wisdom in Job chapter 28, and I will look at that passage. It's uncertain whether the words of Job 28 are the words of Job or the words of the poet. In either case, the book seems to be moving towards an answer to the question of the righteous suffering. It asks the question in Job 28, where is wisdom? Can wisdom be mined like metal from the earth? Job 28:1, there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. But wisdom is not so easily obtained. Verse 12, but where can wisdom be found? Verse 13, it cannot be found in the land of the living. In fact, a full understanding of wisdom is beyond human ability. God understands the way to it, and He alone knows where it dwells. Yet we know that God has built wisdom into His world, verses 24 through 27. For He views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When He established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when He made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then He looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And since God alone has true wisdom, Job needs to trust in God and obey Him and not question His wisdom. And a man, he said, behold the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. This poem is at the center of the book, and it indicates that Job has begun his journey back to simple trust in God. Wisdom for finite human beings is fear of the Lord, or you might call it piety. That is what Job is called to do, to fear the Lord, to trust in the Lord in faith. So Job must trust in God even if he does not understand why what is happening is happening. We'll continue the discussion of the book of Job in part 3, and my name is Dr. Joe Sprinkle.